Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for January 10th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Welcome. Joining the program today, we have Nancy Grover and Jim Clausing. Thanks for joining us today. My name is John Hogoboom, and let's jump right into the stories we have for today. So the first one I'll talk about, and it's there's a Java 7 Update 10 zero-day exploit. It's just announced today, January 10th. It's being seen exploited in the wild. Now, the story comes to us from the Alien Vault Labs, which is a pretty good malware analysis site. If you haven't looked at it before, the link is here up on the screen. And through some of their contacts, they did some analysis here. This is an exploit that will work against Java 7 Update 10, which, by the way, is the most latest version out there. And it's unclear right now if it affects all versions of Java 7 or just Update 10. I'm not quite sure. I think they're still doing some analysis on that at the time that we're filming this. As I said, it just came out this morning. So there is malware being distributed via this. It's already been instrumented in the black hole and nuclear exploit kits. We've talked about black hole exploit kit a lot on this program. There's a lot of malware that gets distributed via people who use the black hole exploit kit. Nuclear exploit kit is another, a different person put that together, but it's a very similar kind of technology there, a similar kind of toolkit. As I said, it's unconfirmed right now that it's exploitable in all versions of Java 7. We only know right now that it's definitely in Java 7 Update 10, which is the most latest version. Some of the vendors, what they're saying to do is if you are running Java 7 Update 10, you might want to just disable the Java plugin in your browser so that it can't be launched and triggered from a web page that you're viewing in your browser. And I linked some instructions on here how you might want to do that. The Java instructions from Oracle, is probably the best place to go. In Java 7 Update 10, they've actually made it a lot easier to disconnect Java from your browser as a feature. So I don't know if anybody else had any other information on that. I know this is a new one, so I haven't really seen the exploits myself yet. Other than reading about it, but I don't know if anybody, Jim or Nancy, if you've seen anything.
Oh, what is it supposedly doing?
Well, it's using Java to trigger a exploit, and I don't know the nature exactly of how the exploit gets triggered, but it allows the Java virtual machine to be escaped and to drop an executable onto the machine. And then, from that point, the malware will infect the machine and stay resident on the machine. There's another web page that I did not link here that provides a list of infected websites that are hosting this exploit and distributing malware. I figured it would be best not to publish that. A lot of this is very new. Hopefully we'll get a patch for this pretty soon from Oracle. But until that point, if you are running Java 7 Update 10, I would recommend disabling it in your browser, at least for the time being.
Yeah, it's excuse me. It's one that propagated a whole lot faster than folks were expecting. In addition to those two exploit kits that you mentioned, I've seen some discussion on some private lists that they've seen this exploit show up today in at least 4 others, exploit kits that are widely available. So it's showing up on a number of websites already, and it will show up on a lot more quickly. I understand there's probably going to be a Metasploit module here in the next 24 hours, too, from what I'm hearing.
Right, I had heard that as well. Okay, so just be aware, I guess, if you're watching the program and you are running Java 7 Update 10 and a patch hasn't been released by the time you read this or you watch the show, you may want to disable that from your browser.
And I would expect, knowing how quickly these things happen, that Oracle doesn't tend to patch them in days. They tend to take weeks, so better off disabling it except when you absolutely need it until patch comes out.
Yep, I would agree. It's, truth be told, unless, in my experience, it's pretty rare that you actually need Java enabled in your browser, unless it's some kind of corporate website or some kind of special website that you really need Java enabled. It's pretty rare. So I don't think your browsing experience will suffer greatly by disabling it, but I could be wrong, depending on what you do in your browser session. But for the most part, it seems like most people don't really need Java all the time.
And that's probably true, but it's funny you should say that because just yesterday I was trying to turn Java on in Firefox on a Linux box that I was running because there was a particular website I needed to access that I absolutely had to have it. So
okay. So just refuted my claim.
Corporate environment turning Java off, or do you think that would not be necessarily necessary?
I missed the beginning of that there, Nancy.
Sure. If we're talking about disabling Java, and you had stated that you probably wouldn't really miss it, say out there on your own, but in a corporate environment, you may need Java. So I'm asking whether you would advise that people, even within a corporation or enterprise, turn that off for the time being.
I would say if you need to assess your own environment and whether you have a heavy dependency on Java within the browser in your particular enterprise. And if not, then it's probably safer to disable it temporarily until a patch comes out. As I would expect, there's going to be a lot of websites, drive-by type websites, as well as spam emails coming out pointing you to those drive-by websites over the next week or so here, trying to lure people in and infect their machines. So better safe than sorry if you can disable Java and not terribly inconvenience yourself. That would be a good idea. So while we're all anxiously awaiting a patch from Oracle, I understand that we've had some patches from Microsoft and Adobe come out. Is that right, Jim?
Yes, this was the normal Patch Tuesday for Microsoft, the first one of the new year. And they released 7 patches that covered 12 CVEs. They did not patch the IE one, the 0-day that we talked about last week, which wasn't entirely unexpected. It takes time to do the quality control. The out-of-band patches are very rare. Just haven't had time to do that yet. None of the patches that Microsoft released this week are currently being exploited in the wild, but as usual, now that the patches are out there, it's that much easier for the bad guys to develop the exploits. So apply them, especially the critical one that Microsoft is recommending you do first, the XML core services, the XML parser, other vulnerability. They've had vulnerabilities there occasionally in the past. Adobe also did their quarterly patches on Tuesday, and they patched Adobe Air, Flash Player, Acrobat, and Reader. The big ones are the Acrobat and Reader 9 on Windows. Those are really critical. If you're still running Adobe Acrobat 9 or Acrobat Reader 9 on Windows, you really need to apply those patches because there was remote code execution in those. So, it's the software that seems to be ubiquitous now. You need to make sure you keep up on the updates. And in this case, the Adobe are the big ones from this week.
Yeah, you make a good point about making sure that you patch, because once they release these patches, it really does tip off the bad guys on how to basically build an exploit. Because now they can say, well, what's the difference between, what it used to be and what they actually fixed? And it makes it a lot easier for them to target in on what specifically was the problem that the patch addressed. And there'll still be a lot of people out there who don't patch right away or even within a week or so. Sometimes people don't patch for a long period of time, and that leaves a big pool of vulnerable machines out there that they can target, especially the remote code execution ones. Those are always the ones you need to worry about. So, good point. And everybody should patch as soon as possible.
Yeah, and these automated, most of these Adobe and, Oracle with the Java and Microsoft with the Windows stuff, they have their automatic, in the browsers, Firefox and Chrome, all do the automatic updates. But you need to double check and make sure that they're actually getting applied.
Right. So is there any word on when they might have a patch out for the IE 0 day?
I have not heard anything definite on that. I'm expecting it'll probably be next month. And the one follow-up, last week we talked about the fix-it that Microsoft had released that took care of the particular exploit that was seen in the wild. And afternoon that we did the taping of the broadcast, later that afternoon, I saw a report that folks had bypassed the fix-it already.
Right.
So I don't know if there's going to be another fix-it, but I don't expect the IE patch to actually occur February's patch day.
Okay. Well, like we said, from what we've seen, not that it's necessarily, the initial way this was released was in a very targeted attack against a very small set of people. But now that people know about it, I would expect that just like, the Oracle, the Java 7 one that we're talking about, once people know about it, they can start building their own or reduplicating that same exploit and putting it in their own toolkits and whatnot. So hopefully we won't see more generic attacks of it out there. And the other how things go.
Yeah, the other thing about the IE vulnerability that we talked about last week is it doesn't affect 9 and 10, which are the two most current versions. It affects 6 through 8, which is going to be running on old systems.
And while I don't have a lot of information that I can provide, we, in our daily course of work, look at advanced persistent threat targeted attacks, and I have, as recently as this week, seen similar types of attacks targeting IE8 specifically, which is interesting. So I didn't get a chance, or I know some of our analysts are looking into that and how that exploit actually works, but that might be part of that whole override process there or whatever that they figured their way around. So good to be wary of it, and hopefully you don't get snagged by it. All right, so moving along, let's take a look at the weather report. And it's actually been pretty quiet the first part of the year here, the first couple of weeks. I think Brian didn't really have much to cover last week either. There's not a whole lot going on. One notable thing that I noticed this week is that there was a decent uptick in scanning activity in the number of sources scanning on 3389 TCP, which is Remote Desktop Protocol. This is about we have a baseline. There's usually around 3,000 scan sources scanning this all the time. But it went up to about 4,500, it looks like. So we had about a 1,500 scan source increase, which is pretty significant. When I looked at it, it was primarily sources in the U.S. and China. I don't know if there's probably a botnet behind it in some respect, but I don't know if it's a particular one or, what the direction, who was directing that traffic. What I can say is this past week, I've been looking at some other security issues for somebody else, and if you are running, and we talk about this all the time, if you're running machines that are directly connected to the internet and you're allowing 3389 TCP in, Remote Desktop Protocol, or SSH, or Telnet, or VNC, any of these types of services that allow administrative full control to your machine, you're insane if you're doing that, especially if you're not limiting, if you do need to have it open, only allow certain subnets or certain source IP addresses to get in there that legitimate administrative personnel are going to be logging in from. So that's a really critical point. We know that there's tons of Remote Desktop Protocol scanning out there on the Internet. As a matter of fact, I think I mentioned once, I put a machine out there just for fun, and within less than an hour, it had already been compromised by the Morto worm, which is a brute force hacking Remote Desktop Protocol worm that compromises systems. So I did intentionally put a weak password on there, and that's how it got compromised quickly. But it's a good point that if you're going to put these things out there, be very careful. Make sure you have super strong passwords. Limit access to it only from sources that you know and trust. Don't allow anybody on the Internet to connect to these, to your machines on these ports. Next one, that we've seen somewhat of an uptick on scanning on 25 TCP, which is the Simple Mail Transport Protocol. This is probably, and it's not a lot of increase. We're seeing an uptick here. I guess it was last week, and we're seeing some more aggressive scanning. It's quite a bit. It's 45 million flows per hour, where normally we're having a baseline pretty low, down in the 1-2 million range here. So there's some pretty aggressive scanning going on, looking for SMTP servers. My guess here, just looking at the activity that I'm seeing, is probably some type of attempt to identify open SMTP relay servers for sending spam. That's just a guess. I don't know of any particular vulnerabilities that they might be looking for, but that's my guess at the moment. So if you are running a SendMail server out there on the Internet, you might want to look for any kind of scanning activity going up against it and make sure that it's secure. This is one of those types of ports and services that you do need to kind of allow people that you don't know. Like on the previous slide, I said only allow certain sources to connect to it. In this case, you're going to have to let lots of different people connect, usually, depending on how your environment's configured. You might have a corporate environment where you're peer-to-peer or something with certain trusted SendMail servers, but in some cases you might have to have this open to many different sources that you don't know. So you would need to audit and make sure that you're looking at the activity occurring there, so it's not being abused. And the top 10 most probe ports, no big changes here. We're seeing 445 TCP, which is SMB, that's for file sharing and other remote procedure call activity on Windows. We see that all the time. I think Contractor is one of those ones that spreads via that, as well as a bunch of others. 16464 UDP, 16471 UDP, they are both related to Zeroaccess, which we've talked about. It's virus out there. It's spreading. It's been spreading for quite a while, and been asking people to take a look at your firewall logs to see if you see lots of drop activity or other activity to destination 16464 UDP, because it is a peer-to-peer type of botnet, and it's just randomly kind of scanning for anybody out there who will answer them on these ports. So it's not a directed kind of traffic. That's why it shows up as scanning activity here. 1433 TCP, Microsoft SQL Server, we've talked about a lot before. There's various vulnerabilities for that. 23 TCP Telnet and 3389 TCP Remote Desktop Protocol, 22 TCP SSH, and 5900 TCP VNC, all which we mentioned on the first slide. These are administrative tools for getting remote control to your machine. Usually it's put there intentionally so that you can log in and administer, maintain your machine and whatnot. But the bad guys know that, and they're looking for other people who have, set their machine up, allowed it to be on the Internet for anybody to hook up to it, and they're trying to break into it, either through an exploit or through brute force password guessing. So be wary of that. And then, as we mentioned, we're seeing an increase in scanning on SMTP. Just a slight uptick on that this past week. The most sources probing, so this is instead of how many scans in general, and as a total sum, which was the last slide, this is the most number of sources, unique sources doing that activity. There's not much of a difference here, although you can see that the Zeroaccess shows a little bit more prevalently here. So in the previous slide, where you might only have a small number of sources scanning on 22 TCP SSH, we see lots of bots, Zeroaccess bots, out there scanning on these various ports, trying to find other peers of theirs to connect with. So the 16464, 471, 465, 470, those are all Zeroaccess infected hosts trying to find each other. 23 TCP Telnet is another one that we have also mentioned, 3389. 3074, not quite sure that I can completely attribute it to the proper source, but it might be Xbox gaming. Not positive on that one. But I do know for certain that 27015 is gaming. That's part of Valve's Steam protocol, and that typically shows up as scanning activity, and though it's benign, it's just gaming related. And lastly, I wanted to bring up Zeroaccess since we're talking about it. I take a look at this every now and then. It's been a while since we've looked at it. Prior to the April timeframe of 2012, we didn't see any of this traffic on these 16400 ports that we were just talking about. And then it rapidly increased here. You could see lots of activity. When we took it last time, we took a look, and we saw that there was somewhat of a slight downturn in activity that I was hoping was going to continue. Well, if we look at today, January 10th, hasn't really continued to downturn. It looks like it's kind of leveled off into the beginning of January here, 2013, and actually into December, probably through the past last part of the year there. So it's still there, and if anything, there might be a slight uptick in it, but again, we'll see if that maintains. I was hoping to see it kind of go down again like this curve goes up, but it's still out there. If you have hosts, it's a very difficult piece of malware to remove from your machine. It does rootkit. It does get into the underlying guts of the operating system, such that you'll probably have to just do a clean reinstall from scratch and make sure that you wipe the master boot record on your machine while you do it. So it's troubling. It's a very difficult one to remove, and that's probably why we haven't seen it decrease as much as I would have hoped.
What would let's say a personal computer user, what would they be seeing on their computer that would indicate they maybe are infected, or would they not see anything?
They probably wouldn't see anything unless they were savvy enough to look at network activity, exiting their network. There might be, and I can't really advise exactly how to do this, but I know on a lot of firewalls, personal home firewalls like Netgear and Linksys, you can go in and take a look at active connections. There's some way to do that on most of those. You might see these kinds of sessions in that list, but I can't say for each model vendor where to look exactly, but that might be one pointer of reference that you could go look for. But on the machine itself, probably not very easy to detect. Make sure if you don't have antivirus running on your machine that you do and that it's up to date. Not that that's a guaranteed 100% guarantee that you're going to pick it up and clean it, but it's certainly going to help prevent you getting infected in the first place or from other infections. I highly recommend having some antivirus solution on your machine. Okay. Anybody else? Any other input before we wrap up? I'll take that as a no. So that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. This video program is also available at att.com/ThreatTraq, and it's also available on YouTube. There's also an audio version available, so you can listen to it on your way into work in the morning or on the way home. It's available on iTunes. Just search for ThreatTraq. And again, thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.